What's going on, everybody? Today we're going to be changing the front and rear sprocket as well as the chain on my 2007 Yamaha FZ6. For this job, I'm going to be using a Pro PBR chain tool. I'll link down in the description for the tool. It'll be my first time using the tool, so I'll show you a little bit about how to use it, but I know there's great videos about how to use this tool online already, so check those out as well. Whenever you change a chain, because that's really what's worn out on my bike, you're supposed to change the front and rear sprocket as well because they all wear together in the same pattern. If you were to just change a chain and not change the sprockets that go with it, that chain would have a shortened life because of the worn out sprockets engaging with that chain, accelerating the wear. So today we've got all brand new parts. To get started with this job, we got to get the chain off, and my weapon of choice is going to be an angle grinder instead of using this chain breaker. So I'm just going to cut the chain right off, and then we'll get to taking the wheel off, taking off this cover for the front sprocket. I'm going to elect to take off the shift rod here at the selector shaft that comes out of the transmission by taking out this 10 mil, taking that out and sliding it off, just so I have more room to get this cover off. I'm not sure if we need to do that, but I'm going to do that. Let's get into it. Next up, we got to get the rear wheel off, so you can use your Yamaha supplied tool or a 32mm, take off the axle nut, get your chain out of the way, slide out the axle, pull out the wheel, because we need to get these nuts off to change out our rear sprocket. Let's get it. Next, you got the front cover off. I'm going to take off the shift rod from the shift selector rod coming out of the engine here. There's two dots that line up the rod, the arm that goes around it to the rod. It's just a 10 mil. You have to take the 10 mil all the way out because it goes through a groove in the rod. Once that's off, you can shuffle it out of the way and use 5mm Allens to get this front plate off that covers the front sprocket. Let's get it. Ew, look at all that grime. I forgot to film it, but to take off this front nut, you need a 30mm socket. You also have little push-in grooves here where the top of this nut gets punched into the groove so it can't back off. I know this was a common issue with the first version of the FZ6. So get that 30mm, bust it off. It helps to have your chain still on the bike so that basically I could hold the chain with my foot to keep this from spinning, and then I could use my muscles to spin it off. It's not super tight. I'll have the torque specs in the description down below. Great time to clean up behind the front plate. Got that all cleaned up now, ready for a new chain and sprocket. This is a perfect example of a worn out gear. Look at the teeth here, how hooked they are on the front leading edge. This was the driving side going this way, so you can see they'd all be hooking on the thrust side here, and man, this is worn out. You can also see that the grooves in the dampener are being worn out. Yikes. This thing has seen better days. So I laid out the old chain next to the new chain and lined up the links and ensured I counted all the links correctly. And this is how much I have to take off. I ordered a 120 link chain and the bike only takes 118. So I ordered an EK type chain that has a screw type connector. I know this DID is the factory chain for this, but it'll work just fine. It was hard to get a DID chain this time of year. So what I have to do is grind off the rivet head, break off this section of chain, and then I'll use my screw type connector to build the bridge right here. Basically, I'll have an inside chain link to join the other side of the chain, which is an inside chain link like this one as well. So I'll use an outer link to join the two inners, and the link will be one chain link shorter. Alright, so now I've got my Pro PBR tool. I've lubed up everything so the threads move smoothly. I have my B lined up with the brake. I've ground off the rivet head. Now, Pro doesn't tell you to do that, but after reading many reviews about people breaking chains and stuff and breaking the tool in the process, it sounded like people were basically saying that the tool is strong, but it's not strong enough to push the rivet head through the entire chain link. That makes sense. You would want to grind off the head of a rivet before you shove it through a hole if you can. So that's what I've done. Now it basically says to line it up like so. You got to thread the extractor bit back so that it has room underneath the body here. And then bring the bolt body back. line it up a bit more. And there, and it should look like this. The base of the chain link should fall into a divot right about here. And then you have your body centered on the chain. And you have your B to brake. So I've tightened the body bolt here down against the chain just lightly. Now I'm going to use my 14mm to tighten down on this. I got it there. Now I'm going to hold the chain, basically bring it on home. It's still pretty easy. There's not a lot of force being applied to the wrench. Oh, getting a little easier. We might be through. I think we're through. Let's just go, maybe, that's it, I think. Hey, and there's the pin. Pushed cleanly out. That's great. Got the block right here, sits in the tool. And hey, look at that. Ain't that great? No damage. Both the link still moves great. Awesome. On to the next step. Okay, so now to put the gear on, the front gear. It's a tight fit. My old one slid off like hot dog down a hallway. But this one, I'm just rocking it back and forth, trying to get the slide on, and it's going. Ever so slowly. I can feel it rocking on. Now that it's mostly seated, I'm going to put this on. I'm pretty sure this nut here is supposed to not be reused because the flanges get bent over every time you hammer them into the notches. So yeah, replace yours. I'll order one soon. I just forgot to when I did this order. I put the trans in gear. There we go. There we go. I'm just going to leave it snug right now because I might have to take it off. Who knows? Put the trans back in neutral. So we'll leave it there for now because we're going to roll the chain on now. But before that, we're going to change the gear on the rear wheel. Let's get it. All right, now we have 6 17mm to take this rear sprocket off the drive hub. Before we do install it, you want to make sure these surfaces are clean and there's nothing obstructing the threads from all its life spent in the dirt. When replacing parts of things that spin, it's always a good idea to check and make sure things line up. So I can feel the teeth line up here and the teeth line up here. And then you could also spin it, make sure the whole pattern lines up. You'll figure that out pretty quick. But sure enough, it does. Fort9 did a good job getting me these parts. Thank you. The torque spec to hold on the rear sprocket is 72 foot-pounds, and you're supposed to torque it in a star pattern across the center. So I got my torque wrench set. Alright, so the front sprocket here is torqued to 65 foot-pounds. I put the transmission in a gear so it won't spin. Now let's line it up. Remember, it's a 30mm socket. It looks like first is the best gear to have it in because it gives you the most resistance to torque the nut. We're done. Now that you have it torqued, you need to take a little punch and a hammer and just indent in this little raised collar section so that the nut cannot back off. The last thing you want is this nut to back off, so dent in that and some mechanical resistance to prevent it from loosening itself. Since you're putting a new chain, it'll be less stretch, so you have to undo your chain slack adjustment bolts right here, loosen it, wind it in so you have lots of room when we're setting up the chain. Alright, now it's time to put the new chain in. I'm going to start from the back, work it along the top, around the front gear, and I'm going to let the two ends meet right about here where I can work with it the best. I took this opportunity to clean up the plastic runners that the chain rests on of all the old debris and dirt so it doesn't get muck on my new chain. Let's do it. Hope this works out. So I chose to go with an EK chain partly because of their riveting technique, which means no tools, just an extra 10mm. This is the master link, and basically what happens is you put this through the chain where the two ends meet, push the plate on, and then you use these two nuts here, like this one, to thread onto the studs to push the plate on. Once the plate's seated, you tighten it down, alternating 60 degrees each, so turn basically one wrench flat, so like here to there, switch the next one, rotate each back and forth until the thing is completely seated. This is where it takes a little bit of feel, but you should be able to tighten them until they do not turn anymore. This is what your goal is with the plate. You see in the instructions here basically that the chain link outer plate should be just onto the shiny shaft, not leaving the threads partly hidden inside the plate. So basically you can see this plate's going to be pushed onto the shiny pin here. If it doesn't get pushed on all the way, that's a problem. Before I riveted the plate on, I used a zip tie here to just join the two ends of the chain so I could check my chain slack will be in the right spot or an acceptable range. I've pulled it back so the chain, is a little bit slack, but you can see that I'm in the range. I've got room here and I've got room here for adjustments. So 118 links is what you need. I got my O-rings and my master link here all greased up, ready to install. Got my O-ring on there on both sides. Now I'm just going to add a little bit more grease before we do the final install. I've already greased the X-rings that go on here, but a little bit more never hurt. It's the last chance you'll ever be able to get grease in here, and grease is really the only weather protector. So now comes the time to put these nuts on. Basically you tighten them by hand both to get them seated, and then you start working them with the wrench. The idea is that we're pressing on this outer link onto the shaft of the pin. You have to be careful you don't over tighten and that you do tighten evenly, like left and right of each pins, because if you over tighten you can shear off the pin because it has a neck between this area right here, like where you can see the threads, and what the plate is sitting on top of right now is a thinner point. So if you go a little bit crazy on one pin and don't go on the other, you could shear off the pin and make this master link useless. Wind it on by hand, both of them evenly. Let's get that, yep. And now, you double check. You got both your O-rings in there. Yes, sir. And you start winding them on 60 degrees at a time. So that basically means we're gonna go here and bring that next flat into location. Right there, over here. This one up here. Like that. And like, it's a little bit tough. Really got to wear gloves for this stuff. It's more force than I was expecting, but it kind of makes sense that you have to press this plate on. It takes a good amount of force. So now you're supposed to back them off, take the nut off, and basically see if you can see the plate is all the way on. And if it is, you snap off the nut. Let's see. Just make out a little bit of silver pin poking out from the end of the plate, which is what we want. I've tightened it as much as I can. I'm gonna go back and check it one more time just for good measure, but I'm pretty sure this is as tight as you want it. What you're supposed to do after this is thread the nut on halfway. Basically, you can see where there's a thinning in the rod, where there's no threads. You thread the nut on until that point and then snap it off with a wrench, with some pliers. It's basically how far back you want the nuts, just not quite engaging those last two threads before it hits the outer plate. Then you snap it off. Time to snap. Yeah. Huzzah! This is what's left of the EK chain master link once the heads have been snapped off. They do sit a little further out than the other rivets, but it's fine. I'll spin the chain around, see if it collides with anything. If it does, I can just take a file to it and take off the top a little bit. Now all that's left to do is throw on the front plastic that covers the front sprocket, tension the chain, and test out the job. Hopefully it's no rattles and no ticking noises. That would be nice. That's a wrap on the front and rear sprocket plus chain replacement on this 2007 Yamaha FZ6. It's a rather involved job. It's certainly dirty, you gotta wear gloves for this one, and a torque wrench is highly recommended since you're dealing with the running gear of the bike. You don't want that coming loose. I really let my chain get to the very last day of its life because it was making all kinds of noise with stiff kinks. It was really bad, so don't be like me. Anticipate a chain by looking for signs of wear such as a noise, stiff links, various amounts of tension. Check all those things and anticipate this happening because the last thing you want is a chain snapping or coming off your sprocket. That'd be terrible. I hope this video helped you out. If it did, please smash the like and subscribe button down below. Thanks for watching, and as always, have a good day.